Hi, I'm Tone Lanzillo, and this is Climate-Duluth. Our guest today is someone I've met probably about 4 or 5 months ago through some monthly Zoom meetings with a group called Deep Adaptation Forum. And on a personal note, those gatherings have become really important to me, and I try not to miss them. They're very rewarding and enriching. So I'm really happy that our guest today is Kat Soares. Nice to have you, Kat.
Lovely to be here with you, Tone. Thank you for the opportunity.
You're welcome, and I really appreciate you joining us. Kat's coming from Scotland, which is about 6 hours ahead of us, so it's around 5 p.m. in Scotland right now. Kat, why don't we begin? Why don't you tell us a little bit about Deep Adaptation Forum and how you got involved?
Okay, so the Deep Adaptation Forum was born out of an academic paper that was published in 2018, alerting about the potential for climate chaos and interruptions in our normal ways of living. And that paper was viral, and the professor who wrote it couldn't cope with the volume of emails that were flooding in from people saying, thank you for saying this stuff out loud. We've been thinking this for a long time. And so he decided that with the help of some other people, he would create an online community for people who were feeling or observing climate disruption, and a space where they could connect with one another. So I guess we're a virtual community rather than a movement. I joined the forum. I was one of the early readers of the paper by Professor Bendel, and I was one of the many emails written in thanks to him for saying this out loud. I've been a sustainability scientist all of my professional life. So 30 odd years of dedicating energy and effort to interrupting the trajectory that we were on as a species. And so I joined the forum in March of 2019. And I think you said it beautifully, those meetings for you have become really important. They're nourishing. It's you draw something from that community that is, it sustains you somehow. And the same is true for me. It's become a very integral part of my life. And I've volunteered for a long time. I still do a lot of volunteering, but I'm lucky enough to be part of the core team. So 5 freelancers who are in service of a community which is now probably close to 17,000 people across the globe.
Wow. What are some of your roles and responsibilities as a core team member with the forum?
We're not a registered organization. We exist under the Schumacher Institute, who are our umbrella organization. So we almost exist as a project of. So we don't have a lot of legislative requirements in the way that we operate. But when you're coordinating a group of people from across the world, there's still a lot to manage. So there's a lot of infrastructure to manage with the online platforms and various forums and groups. We have a large Facebook group that is moderated by volunteers. There are lots of activities going on all of the time, lots of different open meetings for people to attend, lots of grief circles, deep listening, meditative practice. There are conversations happening around practical aspects of adaptation. So it's really just supporting that activity. So yes, we have to write some policies, and yes, we have to do some comms, and yes, we have to intervene where there are tensions, which thankfully are rarely. But mostly it's being with whatever is emerging from moment to moment. It's a curious organism, Tone. There is no hierarchy to speak of. So there isn't someone at the top of this pyramid saying, and next we shall all do this, and next we shall all do that, and here are the rules. And so we don't have, it's not at all prescriptive. Adaptation fundamentally is a personal thing. So I guess the principle or the idea of deep adaptation, which is premised around 4 questions, I'll go to those in a moment, is it's a community as space, if you like, a virtual space where people can feel what they're feeling in a safe place. Often people will come into the community and say, it's such a relief to be able to talk without justifying my position. Because of course, the dominant narrative the world over is that everything will be just fine. Technology will solve us. We've got our net zero statements, we've made commitments, but actually there's a lot of climate change baked into the system already, and the impacts are becoming increasingly apparent. And when you open your heart and your mind to the reality of where we are now, that brings with it a lot of emotion and a lot of grief and a lot of anxiety. And so deep adaptation is a space where you can find your tribe, others who are feeling similarly. And once you've processed those emotions, once you're with them, then whatever action invariably people are called to some kind of action, whether that's at a very personal level, but certainly at a very local level to where they live. And so Deep Adaptation Forum doesn't seek to dictate what or how. It simply invites consideration of 4 questions. So it's referred to as the 4 R's framework. It's, you're testing me now, I have to remember them all. So we have, the first question is about what do we have now that we really want to hold on to? What's really important in my life? What do I want to hold? The second question is, what could I let go of in order to do less harm? Yeah. The third question is about what can I bring back? What can we bring back from the past that will help us as we face into this period of trial and unrest and upset and chaos? And the fourth question is about with what and whom do I need to make peace as I accept our mutual mortality?
What other things do you find yourself involved in these days?
I run a small charity that is a Rivers Trust, and we deliver projects of ecological restoration and reconnecting people to their landscape. So often it's been said when people move from the city to the countryside, they find themselves in a green desert. So it's one thing to be in nature, and it's another thing entirely to be able to connect with it. And so we run a lot of programs and activities that build relationships between communities and the landscape in which they live, that considers social, cultural, and built history. But our primary focus is on ecological restoration and on improving the planet for people and for wildlife.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where did your interest in the environment and climate change come from?
At about the age of 13 or 14, I was in the car with my mum, and she asked me the question that every parent asks their teenage children. She said, "What is it that you want to be when you grow up?" And I said to her, "I want to be self-sufficient." And she said, "I don't think I understand what you mean by that. Can you tell me some more?" And I said, "Well, I want a little acre of land with a wooden cabin, a place where I can meet all of my needs for life, where I can manage my waste, where I can grow my food, so that I can be independent of the whole system." Because when it starts to unravel and collapse, I'd like to be in a position to close the door and not engage with the madness of a disintegrating system. And my mum immediately thought that I must have become involved with some cult or another and wanted to whisk me away for some psychotherapy. So I don't remember a moment where I went, "This is all madness, it's going to fall apart." I think somehow it was in me and just waiting to be recognized, if that makes sense. Wow. So I could sense from a very early age that the way that we live in the white, Western, developed, industrialized nations is peculiar. It's a peculiar way to live. And I guess instrumental in that, I moved to Australia at the age of 13 with my family, and I was able to engage with Indigenous people for the very first time in my life. It was the only thing that made it okay for me to leave what was familiar in England and move to the other side of the world. Their ways of living and their ways of being are in stark contrast to our own. So maybe it was something in that, noticing those differences, that brought it into my awareness. So I studied applied sciences and environmental science and ecology and sustainability, and I took a job with the government, the equivalent of the Environmental Protection Agency, I guess, doing research into the natural environment. And then through that became involved with legislation, policy development, regulation, etc., only to arrive at the conclusion after 12 years or so that it wasn't making an ounce of difference. And then I worked in private consultancy. So it's kind of been in me. This interest has been in me all of my life. Right. I don't know where it came from. I can't take any credit for that.
While you were talking, I was thinking about the first two questions you asked for myself, but I think I'll ask you, so for yourself, what are some of the things you want to hold on to? And what are some of the things that you maybe have already let go of or plan to let go of as you move forward?
So when I contemplated the 4 questions, the 4 R's, way back in 2018 when I read the paper, what's really important are my relationships with the people who are dearest to me, and my relationship with myself, honoring that relationship. I think we're encouraged into a lot of compromise through the expectation of others. So I wanted to be more honoring of myself. Music, books, poetry, time, just the space of not being always so busy that you miss the whole of life, waiting for the free times. So that's the kind of, how do we keep what we really want to keep? And that's the R for that is resilience. In terms of what to give up, relinquishment, what do I need to let go of? Well, there are lots of things. Some of those were very physical. So I stopped traveling. I spent my adult life traveling for pleasure and for work. And I made a commitment that I would stop traveling. So I went from traveling perhaps 20,000 or more miles every year. And my commitment now is for that to be less than 5,000 miles. So I'm pretty still. But some of it was about giving up on emotional things or ideas or stories. So giving up, relinquishing the idea that success meant a big house, that success meant a shiny car, that success meant money. So some of it was intellectual surrender, if you like, giving up of things, of ideas, or of some aspirations.
Wow. Your answers resonate with me because being a musician, being a piano player, music's very important to me. I always have books around me. And also your answer to letting go. For myself, I have let go of many things I used to have, whether it's cars, clothes. And I often tell people I try to live a smaller life.
That's the word, a smaller life.
Yeah. So my home at this point in my life is a 10 by 12 space. But I'm content. So what has inspired or motivated you over your life to do the things you're doing, to be involved in the Deep Adaptation Forum and your other projects?
The first inspiration was my mother, who I had to write, and as part of a job interview many years ago, I was invited to write an essay on the person I admired most in the world, and I wrote about my mum, and I didn't get the job because they didn't think that was very, I wasn't very inspired. My mum had a beautiful gift. She freed me from expectation. So I'm sure there were things that she wanted me to do along the course of my life, but she never imposed those upon me. So from a very early age, I was given permission to have some autonomy and some ability to make decisions. Really, my inspiration comes from the first of the things that I wanted to hold on to. My inspiration comes from relationship. So inspiration can arise in any moment and in any context. There are leaders, thought leaders, etc., over the course of my lifetime that I've bumped into, i.e. I've read their books, or I've listened to speeches, or I've, several who come to mind. So at the moment, I'm very much enjoying the work of Bayo Akomolafe, Joanna Macy, and the work that reconnects. Jem Bendell, when he wrote the first deep adaptation paper. So there are lots of sources of inspiration. Communities and relationship, Tone, really matters to me. It makes my heart really happy.
For most of my life, I led a middle-class life. It was very self-centered. And when I moved to Duluth, I joined an intentional community, and it's probably been the happiest or most enriching 5 years of my life. So I can relate to that. When you look at the big world out there, and I ask everyone this, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges we face?
The single biggest challenge we have is polarization. I think, particularly as things become more difficult, and they will, energy prices will continue to rise, food will become scarce in our lifetime, possibly sooner than any of us would like to imagine. I think as things get more and more difficult, our system, the system in which we operate, capitalism, the patriarchy, encourages us to think of ourselves as individuals. It's all about me. That's how we're indoctrinated. It's how we're raised. And I think as things get more difficult, there'll be that temptation to withdraw, to close up, to hoard, to hold on to. And I think that is amplified by the polarization, which it seems is actively encouraged by our political leaders. This othering that happens all the time. We hear it day after day. And I think that polarization is a huge threat, because this is a time when we need to be coming together. It's difficult to make predictions about the threats of climate change, because it's unpredictable. That's what climate change is. It becomes unpredictable. So of course there are very physical and real threats, and there'll be more flooding, there'll be more droughts, our crops will fail more routinely. But I think the biggest threat is definitely the polarization within our countries, within our communities, within our families. That that frightens me more than anything else.
Right. Since we're speaking to Duluth, Minnesota, and this region of the state, and I see the same thing here as well as across the country, but in this city, what would be some words of wisdom you would have at the local level to address this challenge? What have you seen work? What do you think could work to maybe change what's going on?
I think it's almost organic. I don't know that it's something that you can prescribe. It's as simple as 1, 2, 3. So my words of wisdom would be to everybody who's watching, both locally and via YouTube later. If you have an opportunity to do something kind or nice for another person, whether that's opening a door, feeding a parking meter, smiling, making a compliment, I don't know, filling the kettle when you finished with it so that it's full and ready for the next person. The simplest little thing. If you can find something tiny to do for another person, do it. Do it. Every act of kindness matters, whether that's for the people that you share your home with, your heart, your love, or whether that's a complete stranger. And if you benefit from someone else's consideration, make it explicit. And if you don't know who the person was, make it explicit anyway. Tell the story. We have to, my sense is we have to change that narrative. We have to start telling the good stories. We have to start talking about how touched we were when we observed something. We have to be better to one another.
Mm-hmm. Yes, simple and yet very significant. Yeah, yeah. As you look forward, I guess for the rest of this year into next year, where do you think you'll be spending your time? Any specific projects, initiatives you've been involved in, or?
Well, we moved, my husband and I, with my young adult daughter, only moved to where we are now in October of last year.
Oh, okay.
And we have a little under an acre of land here, and we're restoring maybe 2/3 of it back to natural environment. So a lot of tree planting, a lot of reintroduction of wildflower species, etc. And a small part of it, we're growing some food and keeping some chickens and trying to take some more responsibility for ourselves. One thing I did quite recently was I reached out to a bunch of people via our Nextdoor app who are doing similar things, who are trying to grow a bit of food and learning how to preserve foods and learning how to do traditional crafts. And we brought everyone together about a week ago. We opened our garden and had a barbecue and invited about a dozen people to come and spend some time with us. And I hope that in the next few months, there'll be a lot of my time will be invested in building that local community. I've been in motion most of my life, so I haven't had much of that opportunity. And so, yeah, I think we've started a WhatsApp group. We're referring to ourselves as a resilience community. I think I can see myself spending a lot of time teaching and learning with the people who live close by.
That's really cool. That we're having that conversation here in Duluth we have a citywide community garden program, and so that's come up recently. If someone is interested in learning more about deep adaptation or contacting someone or getting involved, what would be your suggestions?
So we have a website, www.deepadaptation.info is the website. Via the landing page there are options for connect or sign up to newsletters. We also have a diary of events that can be found on that website, and all of our events are offered free, and they all have quite nice descriptions there. So have a scroll, register, come along to some events, meet some people. Or I'm very happy for people to reach out to the info@ email address, which comes to myself and the other 4 core team members, and we can make some personal introductions and spend some time. There's a welcome circle held every month, and the details of that event are available via the events page. And that's really the first kind of landing place where people can get their first taste, their first flavor of what it is to be part of this community.
Right. Since I have been involved in it, I'd like you just to mention the crew meetings that are held monthly. What's the purpose of the crew meetings with the forum?
Well, the idea behind the Deep Adaptation Forum, because we are without hierarchy and because people are free to bring forward their own initiatives, pursue their own interests, that's not a way that's familiar working for very many of us. Most of us are used to being in a hierarchical system where someone tells us what needs to be done next and they mark our homework at the end of the weekend. And so crewing, working together collaboratively, requires some skills that we don't automatically have. We haven't learned them through school. We haven't learned them through our professional careers for most of us. Yeah. So the crewing practice call is really about people who have an interest in starting an initiative. And that can be anything. It can be a once a month poetry reading or a community garden that stretches across an entire city. The idea is that the crewing practice is where people who want to work in that way, who want to learn those skills, can come and learn together. We can learn from one another's experiences.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Okay, I personally want to thank you for being with us today. Yeah, this has been a pleasant surprise, and I look forward to seeing you at future forum meetings for quite a while, and I hope you have a good day. Yeah.
Thank you, Tone. It's been lovely to spend this time with you. I look forward to seeing you again soon. And I hope that this in some way has been helpful to the people who read it. Come and visit us at Deep Adaptation.
Thank you. In closing, as I normally do, I like to read a quote. And I've chosen a quote from the book entitled Realism and the Climate Crisis by John Foster. He writes the following: "The possibility of hope is now the central question of our time. That is because it is crucial to the climate crisis, which is our time's overwhelming urgent challenge. Much else is pressing. There's poverty, hunger, war, threats of war, unraveling international institutions, clashing religious fundamentalisms, cybersecurity, the dark web, deep uncertainties around sexuality and identity. The list goes on. This is altogether the most existentially exacting juncture in human history. But the climate crisis is now absolutely primary. On how we respond to that crisis depends, it is increasingly apparent, the future of our existence itself. There can no longer be any serious doubt that the present trajectory of human-induced global heating, unaddressed or even just inadequately addressed, could within the present century take the Earth's atmosphere to temperatures at which civilization, certainly, and maybe human life, could not survive. That claim is so far from being irresponsibly alarmist that it expresses the current sober consensus among informed scientists.